How's it going, everybody? This is Justin Boseman back with another episode of Radical Generation Radio. And one of the things that I pride myself on doing here in this podcast that I want to really express to you guys is I love I love truth. And I want to express to you guys here about kind of some things that I've been seeing that have been going on in this country, and just going over some tidbits of news, going over certain things that have happened, and uh, I think I can give a very interesting perspective on what's been happening. And the very first thing that I want to talk about that I was upset about, and I was really upset. I need you guys to understand just how upset I was when I saw a commercial with what I would call the Hollywood elite trying to convince the Electoral College to cast a different vote based on how they feel. And my issue with that is it's kind of a symptom of what the left does through the media and through TV and through other avenues of media. Is they try to get everybody to believe a popular opinion about something, and they drive this narrative home. And if you don't think like them, they try to reiterate this point over and over and over again. Now they wanted to try to use the Hollywood elites, as I would call them, who are people who don't necessarily have to be affected by the things that happen in the political process, such as they're not really affected by Obamacare premiums. Why? Because they got money. They're rich. They're not affected by some of the loss of jobs in the manufacturing sector. They're not affected by the amount of debt that people have going to college and going to school. They're not affected by having to live off of unemployment because you've lost your job. And they're then trying to tell me, the common American person, that Donald Trump is unfit for president. Now, first of all, let me get one myth out of the way. All right. Anybody who says that Donald Trump is unfit to be president and he's not qualified to be president, they obviously have not even gotten past fifth grade social science, because it explains to you in fifth grade, and I'm going to say, are you smarter than a fifth grader? It explains to you in fifth grade social science what are the qualifications for the president of the United States. And I'm not reading this. I'm just going to remember what I learned when I was a kid. One thing that I remember, he had to be over 35 years of age. That's what I remember. I remember that. He has to be a natural born American citizen, a natural born U.S. citizen. You know, something that our current president, that we found out through a very weird investigation, might not be. Also, he has to, I believe, reside in the United States. And those are the qualifications. It doesn't say anything about holding a political position in the House of Representatives. Doesn't say anything about holding a political position in the Senate. Doesn't say anything about having past legislative experience. Nothing about that. Nothing. It says nothing about that. The president is voted on by the people based off of what they think about his ability to enforce the Constitution of the United States. But the problem is that government has gotten so big, is that people now believe that it is the government's job to give them things and to give them stuff. And so now they vote on a president based off of only what he can do for them. And that's been wrong. That's been a bad narrative. And that's why we have a lot of people who have been crying and protesting, and they're spoiled, and they want to start riots and march and make people late for work and do all these different things. And what they don't understand is that the climate in this country in terms of change, and this is what people on a CNN say, this is what they don't understand, the leftist media, the liberal media, this is what they don't understand. They're not in touch with reality, because in their reality, the policies that the big government that they have passed down, they're not influenced by it. They're not affected by it. It doesn't hurt them. It doesn't hurt Barack Obama to have a bad school system. Why? Because his kids are going to private school. It doesn't hurt most of these politicians that the political system has killed the educational sector. Why? Because their kids are going to private schools that they can afford. Now we see how the left in their agenda, which started in the 60s, with the liberal, communist, Marxist agenda that they put into these public universities, now we see how it has brainwashed the people. Let me tell you something about the state and one of the main things of communism. One of the things about communists that they really like, they like to destroy the family structure. Why is that? Because they believe that a person that doesn't grow up in a family environment or a proper family environment is more likely to be reliant on the state and have the state as a parent. So when they have that, the state can then dictate what they do and how they think and where they go and how much they make and where they spend it at and where they live and how they live. And the state can dictate to them how to think. Reason why they like this is because a person who is more dependent on the state doesn't have the ability to become a free thinker or to develop something that I would call critical reasoning or critical thinking. A lot of people don't. If you talk to a lot of people who have been educated in higher education now, they don't have the ability to critically think. What they do is they repeat things that people have said and have brainwashed them with, but they can't critically think to come to conclusions for themselves. Such as, I can see an argument from both sides of the aisle. I can see an argument for people who might believe one way, and I can see an argument for people who also believe one way. But the one thing that I can do is I can critically think to come to a conclusion based on what I know that the laws are in this country and the Constitution about what is probably best for the nation and what doesn't get in the way of the ability for us as a human being to excel. One of the things about a state and about people who like to cause the government to get bigger than what they are is they basically don't want to reward exceptional people. And they believe that the exceptional people should be brought down to the level of the people who are either choosing to be unexceptional or who just naturally aren't as exceptional. Now, this is kind of amazing to me because, and this is just kind of a leftist thing that they talk about. They always talk about economic inequality and how to bring up people to a certain level and how to make things even. But let me ask you something. All right. Let me ask you something. Let's say a sports league like the NBA. All right. Let's use the NBA. And the National Basketball Association right now is predominantly black. Most of the players are black. All right. Now, some would say that's racist. You know, the leftists would say that that's racist. There needs to be some diversity, right? But is it racist when the people who are excelling at that high of a level, they obviously rise to the top of the pool of people to choose from for that job? So that's why they in turn are there. Nobody looks at it like that though. Is it because they're racist that more players in the NBA are black than white players? No, it's just because it just so happens that the guys who are at the top of the line in terms of basketball skills and athleticism, it just happens to be black. So guess what? They get drafted first. They get brought over first. They get signed first. They get first opportunities. It's not the fact that it makes them as a race any better than white people. It just means that in this particular field, this group of people have risen to the top. But what the leftists want to do is this. What they'll say is this. All right. And this is going to be somebody who gets mad at me for saying this. What they would say, since the NBA is really black and there's a lot of black players, we need to make it even so that there's more minorities, such as there's more whites now in the NBA and there's more Mexicans in the NBA. Now, there are some good white NBA players, you know. So some of my favorite NBA players, you know, were white. Larry Bird, John Stockton, who I love, who I pattern my game after when I do play basketball. But for the most part, those guys are few and far between now. Why? Because they're not at that level in terms of basketball skill. Now, if you were to ask me the same thing about a sport like hockey, is it the fact that hockey is racist because there's not that many black players? No. I say no. I use the same narrative. No, the answer is no. It means that most of the players who are playing at that high of a level to get to the NHL, they're there because they're the best at what they do, regardless of them being white. And that's why they've gotten there. Now, what people on the left do and what people want to do, if you're a liberal, is you want to basically make it so that you discourage the people who are good at their jobs by making it so that people who are inferior to them in talent get places and positions and jobs just based on some narrative that there's inequality. And to be honest, I think that's wrong. And I think that's where a lot of people have gone wrong in terms of how they perceive the problems that we have in this country. A lot of people, if you look at the people on the left, and most of the people who I know who are black Democrats, they always cite racism and they cite injustice and inequality. And then I respond that the issue to me now is not the fact now that people are just racist, because in order for you to be racist, you have to have something that I need that I can't get because you have it, and you intentionally choose to withhold it from me because of my skin color. Most people in America, I'm going to say this, and this is going to be unpopular. Most people in America, most white people, most black people don't have the ability to be racist. I'm going to say that again. Most people in America, black people, white people, Asian people, Mexican people, Puerto Rican people, they don't have the ability to be racist. Why? Because they don't have the position of power to be able to choose winners and losers. Now, if you want to say there's a whole bunch of prejudice in the United States, I'll agree. I'll agree 100%. Matter of fact, I think everybody to some degree is prejudiced, which means to prejudge. I think everybody prejudges something or somebody. But I do not believe that the number one issue in this country now, as much as people have said it, is racism and the inequality because of racism. I don't think that's it. I think when people choose to excel at something, there's no way that you can withhold something from somebody if they rise to the top. Such as, let's say, one good example of this is Dr. Ben Carson. Dr. Ben Carson grew up in the hood. Mom worked 3 jobs, worked hard. He could have ended up being just like the rest of the people in his neighborhood, but he didn't. Instead, he goes out and he gets an education. He gets an education and he decides to become a doctor and make something of his life. And he bucks the trend of what would happen to people who grew up in the hood. Why? Because he decides to go out and get himself educated. He decides to develop a set of skills that make him better than the other people in his field. And that is what America is based on. That's what the free market economy is based on. It's based on people developing skills to the point of where they are the best at what they do, so they need to get compensated for what they do. Oh, man, you're being Uncle Tom. You're being a coon. No, I don't think so. Because you know what? Because you want to know who actually agrees with me on this? God does. God agrees with me on this. The Bible says, this is what the Bible says. The Bible says that the laborer is worthy of his wages. I'm going to say that again. The laborer is worthy of his wages. Now, if you want to break that verse down, basically, we can start it at the laborer, meaning the person who chooses to labor and work hard and persevere and develop skills and outwork people and out hustle people and do things better than people and have a work ethic. It says that person, the laborer, is worthy. That's what it says, worthy, meaning he deserves, meaning he's earned it, meaning he's justified to get it, meaning he now has come to the place of where he can command this. The laborer is worthy of what? His wages, meaning he's worthy of the amount that somebody is willing to pay him. That's what a free market system is set up on. But now what is being taught on college campuses is that people can't develop skills, so they need the government to come in and to regulate and pick winners and losers. That's what socialism is. The government, only the government can choose and decide who wins and who loses. And when you have a group of elitists, this is where this whole podcast goes to. When you have a group of elitists, they're the ones who are deciding the winners and losers. And when you have absolute power, it always corrupts. Always. Absolute power corrupts. So if you're an elitist and you have the ability to pick winners and losers, who is there to govern you to make sure that you're judging fairly, that you're judging equally, that you're giving people an equal opportunity? I'm here to tell you there's no way that any human being can do that. There might be some who try, there might be some who have good intentions, but there's no way that a human being can do that. So you end up with the elites in government, which is what we have now. The elites in government, the elites in Hollywood, picking and choosing winners, picking and choosing who can rise to the top and who stays down, picking it and choosing who gets to get the opportunity and who doesn't. America was based on, it's called the land of opportunity, meaning if you come here, you have an opportunity to make something of yourself, not because somebody is picking and choosing, but because nobody's going to get in the way of you outworking somebody and out developing skills. Nobody's going to get in the way of you doing that. Why? Because it's a free market system. This is why the elites, and this is why the Democratic Party, and this is why the liberal media, that's why they're upset, because when you can't pick and choose winners and losers, you lose control. And that's what the whole thing is about. Government is about control. And I've always been a big person who's been a believer of limited government. Limited government. Limited government means less control, meaning that the control of the people's rights and the people's destiny falls into the hands of the people. I don't want to be weighed down because people around me choose not to work as hard as I do to get something. I shouldn't be penalized because I'm trying to be exceptional while other people don't have the ambition to be as successful as I am. I don't want to be told that that once I get to a certain point and a certain level, I can't rise anymore because it's not fair. I have to share what I worked so hard to earn with other people who have not earned it. The Bible also says that if a man doesn't work, a man doesn't eat. And what they're teaching on college campuses is that it's okay for a man to eat if he doesn't work, as long as the people who are rich and are working, it's their responsibility to feed the people who ain't working. And if they're not, they're evil. And that's why, and it's funny, and that is why I believe that this, there was an advertisement with the Hollywood celebrities trying to convince the Electoral College not to vote for Donald Trump. And I think it backfired on them because I think people recognize when elitists try to dictate to you the way that your life should be. And I think people have a rejection of that. And I think all over the world, you're starting to see people who are beginning to reject socialist, communistic type governments because they recognize that the government and the state cannot create a utopia. I know that's what they teach people in a college, that there can be a utopia where nobody's poor, nobody's without this, nobody is without that. But in the world, there's always going to be somebody without something. That's when it becomes the job of people and the mandate of people who are charitable to give. But when you try to force people to all be up to a certain level, you're killing and dominating the human spirit. And you're killing the unalienable right of a human being to choose for themselves who they will become. Right now, when I'm sitting here and I was watching the Electoral College choose votes, and a lot of people were afraid that they might try to pull a coup, and right now it doesn't look like that's happening. I mean, there have been faithless electors, but I think currently all the votes for Trump have gone to Trump so far. I think Hillary's lost some votes. I think there was a faithless elector in Maine somewhere or something like that. But one of the things that people have complained to me about, and I have to have this conversation with people, was about, and I hear the left use this as a something to lean on, is, well, the Electoral College is terrible, and Hillary won the popular vote, so she should win the election. Let me go back. Let me take people back to civics class. If you ever got the civics class when you were in high school, let me take you back to civics class. All right, I'll take you back to government class. Basically, what happens is this: the Electoral College is set up so that when you elect the president of the United States, and when you elect him, you basically are choosing the electors who are going to vote for him. And the reason why this was set up this way, I mentioned this on a podcast before, but I need to explain it again. It was done this way so that people who live in different regions of the country or different states and who have different ways of life, or in other words, the minorities There's a word that the left likes to use to talk about social inequality and injustice. But it was set up so that the minorities, in terms of population in the state and whatnot, they could be represented and their concerns could be heard by a presidential candidate, because they would have to come to their state and find out what the issues were that they had there and campaign for them there, and hear what's going on in the states where there's not millions of people in. Basically, originally it was set up so that a state like Virginia could not decide for the rest of the other colonies what was best for business. Just because it was good for the state of Virginia might not have meant that it might have been good for the state of Pennsylvania or for Connecticut or New York or Massachusetts or Maine. It could have been any of those things. So they made it so that there were electoral votes given based on population. Now, they all say that it should be based on a popular vote. And they say this because they're very ignorant of the process of it. And let me explain it. In every state, the national election governmentally has always been decided by states. States elect the president of the United States. Such as, if you have California, there's way more people in California than probably Wyoming and Montana and Vermont and Hampshire combined. You know, you could easily just say, well, if those people overrule those people, they win the popular vote, they always get the president. That way, then California and New York and Texas and Florida would always get who they want in that would fit their way of life. But what would that do for the states in the middle of the country? What would that do for the states in the north, such as the Wyomings and the Montanas and the North Dakotas and South Dakotas, the Iowas, the Idahos? They would never get to have representation. And one of the things that's put into the Constitution is no taxation without representation. So those states could complain that they have no representation at the federal level. Therefore, they should be recused from paying all income tax. That would be a valid argument. But they can't say that, because this way, California is limited to their state. So when their state has an election for the federal president of the United States, they decided as a state, California, that they wanted Hillary Clinton. Okay. So based on their population, they get their votes. I think they get 55 votes or something like that. And then you have the states who are small, who might get 5 votes. I think that Nebraska's like this. I think they get 5 votes, and I think that their districts are split up so that electorally they all don't go to the winner of the state. They go by district, I do believe. I think that Nebraska and Maine are 2 of the only states that do that. I may be wrong. I might have to check on that, but that's how they do it. But this way, you can win California, but if you don't go and address the needs of the rest of the country or the minorities, you won't win a general election. And that is why Donald Trump won. Now, if you want to change the system so that people who are a part of the Electoral College have to vote for who their state voted for, okay, I'm all for that. If you want to change it so that the states aren't just winner take alls, such as Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a winner-take-all state. There are no districts for it to be split up. There are no separate districts so that when, let's say, Philadelphia County and for where Philadelphia is, if they vote for Hillary Clinton, there's not a set state or number of votes that go to her, but it goes to the winner of the whole state. So even though Philadelphia and Pittsburgh voted for Hillary Clinton, the whole state of Pennsylvania, though, the rest voted for Donald Trump. So the winner take all was Donald Trump. Now, if you want to split the electoral votes by state into districts, that's an entirely different conversation. And that's something that you would have to discuss with your local legislator, which a lot of people don't do. A lot of people can't name their local legislators because they don't care. They don't vote in those elections. These are the same guys who are appointing the judges and the sheriffs and the DAs and all those other people. But electorally, the reason why this is set up like this is so that the minorities in the states have a chance to have their voice be heard. And so I see why a lot of people are frustrated and why they're upset. You know, you have the leftist liberal California, which to be honest, I still would love to know how many actual citizens voted in California that were legal citizens. You know, I would like to find that out, because to me, it doesn't make sense for California to be leftist and liberal. I think they pay probably the most taxes of any state, I think. That's one thing that I had on my mind. I had that on my mind after I saw that commercial, because I said, how dare these liberal Hollywood elitists, and if you haven't seen the commercials featuring some Hollywood people talking about telling their voters to change their vote electorally, and they don't have to vote for Clinton, but just don't vote for Donald Trump. And I said, this is going to backfire, because the American people are tired of the media telling them how to think. And sure enough, it did. I'm actually glad that this country is actually waking up. And I think also something that has the elites afraid, very afraid, and I mean very afraid. And this is something that I'm going to talk about, is I believe that there is a very precise way to strengthen the country's economy, to get people back to work, to strengthen the dollar, and to have all those projects in terms of infrastructure and building the wall and all those other things, they can be done. And you want to know the one way that I believe that you can take back the country and put it back to the hands of its citizens is to abolish the federal income tax, which would mean you would deregulate and get rid of the Federal Reserve System. The reason why the dollar is so bad and there's so much inflation and why there's a deficit and all these other things and why the economy goes up and down and whatnot, it's set by a group of elitists, privateer bankers who decide for the American people how the economy is going to be. Now, I've said for years that any president who would have the guts to stand up to the Federal Reserve System would probably be one of the greatest American presidents ever. I think there have only been a couple of presidents who have done it. I mentioned the presidency of Andrew Jackson. He stood up to the bankers and he got rid of the Federal Reserve cartel. He got rid of them. Abraham Lincoln also stood up to the bankers, issuing greenbacks during the Civil War and all that. That's why he got shot eventually, because the elitist bankers don't like whenever people come and they actually expose their criminality. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve is a privately owned organization. How many taxes have they paid? How many times have they been audited? I think the only person in Congress who talks about regularly auditing the Fed is Rand Paul. That's it. But I think if in order to bring back and give the sovereignty and give the prosperity back to the people, you need to get rid of the criminal element known as the Federal Reserve Bank. And I think something tells me that Donald Trump is not a part of that system, which is why they don't want him in there. That's why you have the guys spending all this money trying to cause all this social distress to get him out of there and try to illegitimize his presidency. I think that a lot of people who have been stealing from this country and stealing from this nation and doing things behind the shadows in terms of shady business dealings, corruption, I think they're going to be exposed. And I think that's why they don't want this guy in office. But man, this year has been basically, if you look all over the world, you look at England with Brexit, you look at the EU falling apart, you look at people in Germany finally waking up and realizing that this socialism thing isn't working, and letting all these refugees isn't working. You see France now, they're dissatisfied with their dollar and being in the EU and all that. People are tired of this globalistic economic agenda that they have. And it's about time. Last but not least, one of my thoughts was also, I think it's time for people to stop. And this is why I talked about the qualifications of a president, because, the people in the left push this agenda, and people have this agenda where they call people unqualified for office. Let me just explain something to you. When this country was founded, it wasn't founded on the backs of just elitist guys. There were guys who were farmers and regular guys, regular laborers. It wasn't just all rich people making the decisions for the entire country. People who were regular citizens were called upon to serve in government. Why? Because they were a representation of the general population. I think people have this standard of a politician in this country that says he has to be a lawyer, he has to be this, he has to be that, he has to have a PhD, he has to have this, he has to have that. What about just a guy who upholds the Constitution? What about a guy who actually represents your interest? And these are the kind of guys that we, unfortunately, as Americans for too long, have not put into office. And I think Donald Trump, as funny as it sounds with him being a billionaire, he's probably one of the first candidates that people really saw that kind of represented how they felt in terms of his not being politically correct, in terms of him saying certain things about the immigration policy that is not fair, in terms of him saying things about war and why are we spending all this money overseas, and ways to fix our economy. I think that resonated with a lot of people, because I think he represented a lot of people's concerns. And when you have a guy who represents the concerns of the people, a lot of people are going to line up to vote for him. But you don't see that a lot now in politics, because a lot of people who vote now, they're holding on to this idea that a guy who's a candidate always has to be a lawyer. He has to be a judge. He has to be this. He has to be a rich guy. And it's like, what about just a guy who's a good citizen, has a job, people respect him in his job, he's shown some record of public service where he helps his community do some things? Why not vote for those guys? Yeah, I mean, there should be some guys who are lawyers and who write the legislation, and that's what we have in the House of Representatives. There are some guys who are lawyers and who have a law background, and it's good to have that. But what about the guys who represent just the regular Joes, the regular Susies? When these people run, a lot of people don't vote for them, and then the American public gets upset that the politicians aren't bringing things to the table that would actually help the common person, and then they're upset about it. When meanwhile you have an opportunity every 2 years to put somebody in there who has your interests. You can rise up candidates for yourself among people who you know that will represent you. But instead, you let the left and you let the Democrats and you let the GOP just choose for you who to get, when you need to be dictating to them, just like you did with Donald Trump. You dictate to the GOP, no, this is who we want to elect in our primary. And if you don't want to get in line, we'll get rid of you. We'll get you guys out of there. Because one thing that politicians respond to is a threat of getting put out of office. And I think more people need to do that. And I think more people need to be responsible for knowing who they're voting for and why they're voting for them. Right now, it's about, I think it's coming on 4 o'clock now. I'm almost done for this show. But if you're just joining me, the electoral elections are now, they've started in Texas, and they've just concluded in a lot of different states. I believe Illinois, I watched Illinois, even though it was a blue state. They just voted, but I'm looking to see who comes out and who is a faithless elector, and the fallout from that. But I look forward to the coming weeks to see what goes on here. But I'm glad that people are finally waking up to this globalist, elitist agenda. And if you really want to fix the economy, I mean, really want to fix it. If you really want to fix the economy, start at the Federal Reserve. I'm Justin Boseman, and this has been another episode of Radical Generation Radio. Please comment and subscribe. If you have any suggestions, please just comment. I'll try to get them in. And you guys have a blessed evening.